Hey everyone, it's a beautiful spring day here in Utah, and I'm excited because today I'm going to paint one of my very favorite plants, the pepper plant. I am a huge fan of peppers, and I also think it's just very cool that these beautiful little, very friendly looking plants will one day grow a fruit that just makes your mouth burn like hell. The reference photo that I'm using is a photo that I took of my own pepper plant that I'm growing. This one's a pepperoncini, so definitely on the lower end of the spicy scale, but it still has a nice zing. I used to work at this coffee shop that has the best pepperoncini bagels in the whole world, I swear. Imagine a fresh baked bagel that's covered in pickled pepperoncinis and pepper jack cheese. They're so good, especially with cream cheese. So that made me obsessed with pepperoncinis, but I've always just loved spicy foods and hot sauce and such, so peppers have a very special place in my heart for that reason. So anyway, the point of this video, the painting, I'm starting by painting a dark background to provide some contrast to the pepper plant. I'm using the turpentine brush, which is kind of a nice one because it feels a lot like actual paint, where it kind of like mixes the color you're using with the color it's next to, and it provides some nice brush strokes too, which is cool. I've been trying to play more with texture in my art. I have a tendency to make it look a little too smooth, so this is a fun brush that I'm actually trying for the first time in this painting, and I'm liking it so far. So as you can see, I started with making a sketch. I used what Procreate calls the gloaming pencil for the sketch, and I started by just mapping out the general shapes and the position of all the leaves. And now I'm filling in my sketch with the biggest blocks of color that I see. I'm going to play with color a little bit in this painting. I'm trying to make it more dramatic than real life. So like I'm noticing that the shadows are a bluer tone than the rest of the leaves because you can see the light from the sky in places where the sun isn't shining directly. And so I'm really emphasizing that more than what is realistic. I chose a color that is quite blue for the shadows to make it more interesting and to see just kind of how far I can push it. And like the little small leaves, the new growth on the plant, they're more of a lime green than the rest of the leaves. So I'm going to try to make them quite yellow rather than just a lime green. I think it's fun to just experiment and see what dramatizing these colors is going to do. So that's kind of my goal today. This is a fairly experimental piece where I'm playing with the brush texture as well as with the colors. And at this point, I'm still just kind of trying to block in the bigger patches of color that I see. So I see that some of the leaves are less saturated or more of a white green. Other leaves have big blocks of shadow, etc. I'm paying attention to my sketch and the lines that I've drawn, but I'm trying to not worry too much about the structure of the leaves. I'm pretending like I don't know what I'm painting. I'm just painting the colors that I see. So now that I have a base color in all of the leaves, I'm circling back around and I'm putting in the next biggest blocks of color in all of the leaves. On the first go around, I mainly noticed that some of the leaves looked like basically one color or just a couple of different tones. Now I'm going a little bit slower and I'm noticing that actually the light green that I saw before is actually a bit lighter on one side of the leaf than the other, like for example. Or I'm noticing small shadows that I didn't see before, or noticing that the highlights are more of a yellow color than I originally saw. So I'm just slowly building it that way. This for me is one of the least overwhelming ways to paint, just starting with the biggest blocks of color and then just slowly adding more and more color and watching it become more and more refined. If I start by thinking I'm going to have to portray all the small, subtle details right away, I often feel kind of overwhelmed. Since I started with the turpentine brush, which is a very loose textured brush, a lot of the edges look pretty blurry, so I'm coming back and adding a little bit more of distinct edges, which makes me notice some of those cute little details that make each leaf have different character. Like you can see that little fold on one of the bottom left leaves, like toward the base of the leaf. So speaking of my obsession with pepper plants, you can see to the left of the screen, that's a little pepper plant that's in a nursery pot right now. My partner and I planted a bunch of seeds a couple of months ago, and they've been under grow lights indoors, but we've been trying to slowly acclimate them to the outdoors so that we can plant them in the ground pretty soon. We want them to have a bit of a head start because we have a pretty short growing season here in Utah. It's still really cold at night though, so to the point where it would damage or kill the plants. So we've been keeping them in these little pots, and then we just bring them indoors every evening and we put them back outside every morning so that they can adjust to the temperature and get some nice sunlight for the day. So yeah, we're pretty committed. We're going hard, but it's worth it because the plants already look quite big. So we'll get more peppers this year than we ever have, hopefully. We also like to make hot sauce at the end of the summer. We freeze any extra peppers we can't eat throughout the summer, and then we ferment a big batch that will hopefully last us the rest of the year. we put it on pretty much everything we eat. So yeah, you could say peppers are a pretty essential part of my lifestyle. At this point, I also decided that the brown background just wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. I wanted it to have the effect where the plant kind of just disappears into the background. So like some of the edges of the leaves disappear into the background and the stem fades off, etc. And the brown is just a different enough color that it wasn't really having that effect that I was going for. So I decided to paint it a very dark green instead. It looks almost black, basically, and I think I like that more. I think I also like the overall cooler tone. It makes the yellows pop a little bit more, in my opinion. And then I'm also making some of the shadows on the leaves darker to match. So you may have noticed that I'm starting to use the pencil brush more. Before I was adding smaller details with my turpentine brush, but I'm starting to get confident enough in how the base colors are looking that I want to add more texture and structure to the leaves. And the way that I'm going about adding those things is still with the same mindset. So I'm just trying to get into finer, like smaller and smaller colors that I can see. When I was blocking in the bigger colors, I started to notice smaller colors. Like I hadn't noticed that a lot of the leaves have a really thin yellow highlight on the edge of the leaves, for example. Or a lot of the veins in the leaves have a bright side and a dark side. Those are all these kinds of things that I start to pick up on as I continue painting. And that's one of my favorite parts of painting, honestly, is that it just like forces me to look at things really closely. Like, when I first looked at that pepper plant, I was like, yeah, that's cool. It looks like leaves. It's a lot of green. It has some brighter green and some darker green, but that's about it. And as I look closer, I'm noticing that it just has all different shades of green and all different little textures, like the way that the veins and all of the leaves are pretty circular generally. So any place that I have straight lines kind of stand out and look incorrect. And so I feel like I'm just able to spend time with this plant and really study them and get to know them. And I think it's just really beautiful and such a cool use of my time and attention. And it makes it so that I'm more observant in the future. Like when I see a plant or an animal or a person that I've painted in the past, I feel like I'm able to notice more details. As another example of how much I like pepper plants, you'll notice in some of these shots that I tattooed a plant on my thigh, and that is actually also a pepper plant. And not so coincidentally, it's at a very similar stage of growth. I think they're just particularly cute when they're about this big. And this is the part of the painting where I'm trying to decide how much I want to branch out. I'm playing with making it feel a little bit more like a fantasy sort of painting, a little bit more of an ethereal feel. I'm adding another layer on top of the one I've been using for everything else. And so there's the normal setting for layers in Procreate, and then there's another setting that is called the add layer. And that makes it so that when you add color, it makes that color lighter than the color beneath it. It won't add color if it's darker than the color beneath it. So it just gives it a very glowy effect. I pretty much always use an airbrush when I'm using the add layer because I want it to be an even spread sort of glow on top. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm adding the glow on top of all of the highlighted parts. And then I'm adding all of these tiny little dots to give it the feeling that you're in like a fairy woodland or something. After that, I'm going to go in with a different layer, not the add layer. And I'm adding a little bit of the dark green background to the edges of the leaves where there are shadows to make them blend a little bit more into the background and to make it feel like it's more mysterious, I guess. Then another thing with the final details that I'm getting to is that I'm adding even more texture. So you can see that in some places I'm adding kind of like a zigzag lines, and in other places I'm just using my turpentine brush and then making it a big size and tapping my screen with my pencil. And then in other places I'm using the gouache brush and I'm going over some of the places where I feel like the lines are a little bit too scratchy and kind of just smoothing them out and blending it all together so that it looks more natural. And then finally, I'm noticing that the lightest green and the darkest bluish teal look a bit too out of place. So I'm kind of spreading it around to other leaves, adding more of the light green in highlighted areas and adding more of the teal, more bluey dark green into places where there are shadows on the other leaves that currently are just green or black. Obviously, there's like a whole bunch of different blues and greens going on here, but I want it to still feel consistent. Like I want it to still feel convincing that it's a pepper plant, and I want you to be able to tell that the darker parts are darker because they're in shadow, and the light green is that color because it's new growth, etc. So I'm really excited about how this one turned out. I like how it looks a little bit chaotic up close with all the different colors and textures, but if you back up and you look at it from a distance, it looks pretty realistic. The other thing I was trying to decide is if I like that ethereal add layer with the glow, and I think I ultimately decided that I don't. I think it looks a little bit too blurry There's already so many different colors and textures going on that I think it just makes it a little bit confusing, so I'm leaving it out. But I'd love to hear what you think about that. Do you like the glow and think I should have kept it, or do you think I made the right call leaving it out? So let me know your thoughts about it in the comments. Here's a little bit of a zoom in so you can see what's going on close up, can see a little bit more of the textures and brush strokes, etc. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.